I now give the virtual floor to Mr. Coco Alcuaz, Executive Director of the Makati Business Club.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel discussion. Of course, it's a very good time, very interesting time to be doing this. We're all, number one, coming out of the pandemic, I hope, or we hope. Number two, instead of scarring or pandemic scarring, or instead of just pandemic scarring, we're obviously meeting a different challenge now with this inflationary high interest rate and possibly recessionary environment that we're all in. In the Philippines, we can also say we have some unique situations here. For example, inflation in sugar prices. We have inflation in white onion prices, and the most important inflation of all is the big inflation in the number of Philippine Economic Society presidents who are in high positions of government right now. There is two of them who are already there, and one of them who has come back. And I don't know if that's the definition of persistent inflation that we're having there. We have a great panel to discuss all of this morning, except that last topic. And I'm going to introduce them one by one. After that, I'll call them up on stage, and I will be at, and then they will all have about 5 minutes to give a statement on the topic for our panel discussion this morning, which is moving forward from where we are now to a future-ready economy. So I'll introduce them one by one, and then I'll call them up. Then we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll have questions from the audience. There are mics, as you know, here for those in the room, but for those of you who are joining us virtually and also here, you can put your questions on Slido as early as now, so that we'll get to your question first when we open it up for questions. So our speakers today, our panelists today, I'll just introduce them, and then I will call them up. So please don't stand just yet. Our first speaker is NEDA Undersecretary Joseph Capuno, who will be representing Secretary R.C. Balisacan. Undersecretary, Mr. Capuno is the Undersecretary for Investment Programming, which I think means he's responsible for or involved in developing plans and policies, project monitoring and evaluation, as well as ODA. He's a UP economics professor who is seconded to NEDA, and he has published research on fiscal decentralization, healthcare utilization and financing, impact evaluation, and subnational growth and development. Our second speaker is Dr. Raul Fabella, who we've already heard from this morning. He's a UP economics professor, and as you heard, he is only one of three national scientists from the economics field that the Philippines has had. He has initiated concepts such as development progeria, conglopolistic competition, the landed poor, debt-adjusted debt-adjusted exchange rates. I kind of know what all of those means. The last one, I don't know what it means. Divide by N. And maybe if we have time, I'll ask him what that means. His current research interests are regulation, competition policy, inclusion and industry structure, and the electricity industry. In his bio, there's actually a bigger section as opposed to his economic interests on his musical and other interests. And that's a very long list that I will skip right now, except I would say, I think with his permission, that the one thing he's apparently not an expert in is the guitar, which he says he loves, but it's an unrequited love. Is that correct? Our third speaker today is Dr. Selva Ramachandran. He's the head of the UNDP in the Philippines. Before this, he was the resident representative of the UNDP in Sudan and country director in Libya and Yemen, as well as other posts at the UNDP where he has served since the year 2000. In the 1990s, he was the manager of AusAid in Malaysia. And aside from more or less common economic subjects, when I see the CVs and resumes of people like you, I see more or less familiar topics there. He has some topics which I don't see, and those are the ones I'll mention here. He's an expert, aside from all those economic topics, on community security, stabilization and peace building, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, and partnering against violent extremism. I'm not sure if we need to use the disarmament expertise and the partnering against violent extremism to adjudicate the discussion that we're going to have in the panel in a moment. With that, I'm going to call the three of them up on stage, and maybe you can join me now in welcoming them with a round of applause. Gentlemen. So we're going to begin, and I'm going to start first with Yusek, and then with Selva rather, and then with Dr. Fabella. And I'll ask each of them in turn to give some 5-minute remarks on our topic today, which is really moving forward from where we are now to a future-ready economy. And I'll ask Yusek first to begin.
Thank you. Yes, President Justin Joc Monsicat and my fellow panelists, Dr. Fabella, or Selma Ramachandran, MBC Executive Director, Coco Alcuaz, and to our guests joining us in the audience today, in behalf of Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, who's attending the Senate hearing for our budget, I bid you all good morning. Let me just read this prepared speech for today. The uncertainty in the global economic environment, combined with the end of hyperglobalization, is ushering in a new wave of ideas regarding the strategies that developing economies must undertake to catch up to the richer economies. It seems as if the world has grown discontent with the effects of globalization, from the way it has caused the hollowing out of the middle class of developed countries, to the way it has disrupted local industries and livelihoods with increased competition from imports. Globalization has also exacerbated the detrimental effects of the global pandemic, allowing us to witness how trade-dependent economies struggle as they experience a health and economic crisis brought by lockdowns and movement restrictions needed to contain the rapid spread of virus. These developments have further inspired a new wave of protectionism and rising trade barriers from economies as countries seek to defend and protect their own needs first. This imposes challenges to the export-oriented strategies taken by economies seeking to move up the technological ladder. As we juggle the many needs of our recovering economy during these challenging times, the economic team of this administration has foreseen the need for policies and strategies that foster economic growth that is inclusive and promotive of the equality of that promotes the equality of opportunities as the economy expands. Yeah. Taking on these lessons we have learned from the pandemic, we wish to grow while ensuring equitable outcomes for our people, most especially in the aspects of health, education, as well as digital infrastructure. During the pandemic, we have witnessed how the poor and the vulnerable have little to no access to essential social services. In particular, the unequal access to digital infrastructure is sure to have impacted educational outcomes, which will have long-term consequences for our people and economy. We aspire for an economic growth that will be felt by and be beneficial to all. To do this, we will need to reinvigorate high-quality job creations for Filipinos, which will in turn lead to higher wages and accelerate our nation's efforts to rapidly reduce poverty. Of course, in the short term, we will provide targeted cash transfers to groups which need assistance to cope with rising prices, even as we commit to work within our tight fiscal position and continuously improve food security through efforts that will result in greater agricultural productivity in the medium term. The Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028, which NEDA is currently drafting, is the country's strategic roadmap or development blueprint towards attaining these goals. As outlined in the PDP, we will transform services to enhance human and social capital so that we may build the capabilities of individuals and families to live a more prosperous and advantageous life and allow them to become resilient against shocks that may erode their purchasing power. We will also focus on transforming the production sectors so that they can provide a range of goods and services at competitive prices to Filipinos and to the world. We also seek to address the mismatches in the labor market and rethink our education system. Given the rapid changes seen in our labor markets, and as the market demand shifts to workers who have acquired new skill sets relevant to emerging industries, it is critical that our most important asset as a nation, the Filipino people, remains resilient against any uncertainty our economy faces, whether these are the future pandemics, recessions, as well as disruptions caused by technological, environmental, and geopolitical factors. As we navigate all these challenges, we will need the support of the private sector and everybody else. As the Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028 is anchored on the Vision Natin 2040, the strategies are geared towards achieving our nation's overall mission, which is a strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life for all Filipinos. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussions that we will be having in the session.
Secretary, thank you very much. I'll turn now to Dr. Fabella for his remarks.
The title is there.
Sorry?
The title is there.
Dangerous Thoughts for a Breakout, a Pro-Tradable Ecology.
Do you have a pointer?
A clicker?
Oh, how do you?
Are you okay sitting down, Doctor? You want the podium back? Or are you okay there?
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Next. Sorry. In any case, that is just to warn you that I'm going to try to get out of the box. So some of the things that I will say theoretical. For be condemned. But this Prince once said, Einstein, unless they laugh at your ideas do not have a future. So I'll try to be laughable. Yes. Okay. Next slide. Well, I start with the motherhood statement. That's not very laughable. The crisis is an opportunity for to leapfrog to a better growth trajectory. My contention is that growth led by an overdeveloped service sector with a retreating manufacturing in a low-income country is not good. I call that progeria, development progeria. And it leads to slow growth and slow poverty reduction. We have empirical evidence for that. So we must leapfrog development. We must leapfrog development progeria.
Doctor, I think you just tell them to move to the next slide.
Okay, go back. Sorry, go back. We must leapfrog development progeria towards what I call a convergent growth. Convergent means that we have some hope at some point to catch up with the developed countries. In other words, we will be like Vietnam. Vietnam, which I'm sure anybody will take a bet here, will become an OECD country in perhaps 10 years. The Philippines, not sure. Investment is the key to leapfrogging. There's no ifs and buts about it. It's with investment. Next, please. Next. The Philippine investment rate has perennially fallen too low behind that of our Asian rivals. This is the first sin. The second is that the Philippine investment has fluctuated disproportionately to the non-traded goods sector, property, real estate. It's what I call non-traded goods addiction. We are addicted to putting all our money in high-rise apartments. Okay. Next, please. Comparative investment rates of selected Asian countries, 2010 and 2020. The Philippines is in red, and of course, it's also the lowest. Our investment rates are essentially the lowest. China, Vietnam, they're all astronomical compared to us, which says something about us. We have little regard for our future. We have very high regard for current consumption, which says something about a nation. Next, please. The result of this addiction for the non-traded goods sector is that our non-tradable share the share of services is extremely high. It's actually at the OECD standard now. It's here. Manufacturing versus services. Services in the Philippines currently is about 61%. OECD standard share of services is 60% and above. Our share of manufacturing is very low. And incidentally, going lower also. Now, that is not a bad picture for a country with a per capita income of $30,000. That's just normal for them. But for a country with a per capita income of $3,400, that's bad. We are showing pictures of old age. And we are showing attitudes that we are rich, but we really aren't rich. Next, please. Now, Dani Rodrik is, of course, I follow his ideas. And I like the older Dani Rodrik. I disagree with the Dani Rodrik that you listened to today. I think it was because he was still not at the top of the profession, of the discipline, which is why he was much, much more, how do you say, courageous. But now that he's at the top of the discipline, he will say, oh, be careful. Be careful. And in that paper, I said something about the thesis. His thesis was countries that undervalued currencies did very well. And the reason is undervaluation of currency is a way of leveling the playing fields for tradables. Because under no intervention, tradables will always be the last of the minds of investors. Tradables, non-tradables, mabilis ang turnover dyan. Mabilis ang payback period dyan. Manufacturing, medyo matagal. And you have to compete with the rest of the world. Medyo mahirap. Ganon, ano? He was really thinking outside the box. In fact, the implication of his policy, of his thinking, was he was stepping out of the then dominant thought collective, which is called the Impossible Trinity Collective, which since the 1990s, the World Bank and the IMF have stampeded less developed countries into open your capital account to attract foreign investment and then stay away from fixed exchange rates. Okay. And the enforcement mechanism for fear of fixed rates, it's what is called the portfolio investment, whizzing across borders at warp speed. If you are behind the interest parity curve, you will lose your, you will have tremendous capital flight. And of course, your interest rate and your exchange rate will be determined in Washington, not in our BSP, determined in Washington. Next, please. The biggest heretic to the Impossible Trinity was the author himself. The author of the Mundell-Fleming Impossible Trinity was Robert Mundell. Because he understood the model, and he knew that the way it was carried by the World Bank and the IMF was stupid. So he supported the yuan undervaluation policy of the Chinese People's Republic of China, and supported with some capital controls. I'm just saying that the biggest, the person who should understand Mundell-Fleming model himself was actually a heretic with respect to the application, interpretation within the Impossible Trinity thought collective, or I call it a thought bubble. If you step out of that, you will be attacked like crazy, as if you are crazy. So the Philippines is the highest ratio of portfolio to FDIs. Yes, we did attract a lot of foreign investments, but they are portfolio. Did we attract what we wanted? FDIs, but especially FDIs for tradable goods sector? We are the last in the region on that. Next, please. This is recent evidence on the exchange rate regime. I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but the evidence now is that the flexible exchange rate is a bad way to grow. Inflation targeting either does not improve or reduce growth prospects. It reduces inflation only when adopted during a crisis. These are by very current papers. Next, please. But a pro-tradable ecology goes beyond the exchange rate. If you stay there, it's not going to do you very much. It's going to do you something, but not very. You have to think, for example, about the power cost. If your power cost is the highest in the ASEAN, as it is, then attracting foreign investors will be quite difficult. A friend of mine was in Beijing in a workshop, and it happened that there was a Honhai resource person. What's Honhai in English? It's the biggest private sector employer in the world, apart from, I think, a U.S. Walmart, yes, aside from Walmart. But probably now it's bigger. In any case, what he said was unprovoked. He said, we are also thinking of diversifying, and we're thinking of the Philippines. But he said, we are very reluctant. At that time, kay Ninoy Aquino pa to eh. At that time, he said, we have a geopolitical problem with China because of the arbitral decision. And China still remains as our biggest. And second, your power cost is very high. So they were thinking of the Philippines, but two things: geopolitical problems, which is still with us, and of course, the power cost. Our Meralco bill comes with additional imposts, about 15% from universal charge, machinery, debt service. You know that Germany exempts manufacturing from this nuisance. In Germany, these charges are taken by the treasury. That's because they are missionary. It should be the treasury's problem. But that in the Philippines, it results in our industry and establishment tariffs, the highest in the ASEAN. We have the lowest household tariff in the ASEAN, the highest establishment tariffs in the ASEAN. Next, please. Well, we have to exploit, I think, exciting investment opportunities in renewables and battery storage. The reason is power. With distributed power generation like solar PV mounted on rooftops, there is no transmission cost. There is no distribution cost because it's just there. And that's a considerable amount of charge on our bill. And of course, the universal charges are collected via the grid. If you don't use the grid, you don't pay the universal charges. So there is a logic to exploiting our idle rooftops and making them solar PV farms. Next, please. The next one is also something to do with a very important tradable sector in the country, and that is agriculture. We have, over the last 40 years, adopted a policy of fragmenting farms. And very small farmers, as much as we hope that they would, cannot buy equipment, cannot invest in new technology, because they're very small. They're too small for that. So we must encourage consolidation of farmers. There's a bill in Congress seeking to raise the ceiling for household farms to 25 hectares. It is now 5 hectares. And if I had my way, to 1,000 hectares for PSE registered companies. They're owned by thousands of people anyway. So we must abolish straitjackets. The past 40 years, we have been imposing straitjackets on different sectors. These are not only the farm sector, but mining, forestry, and marine. Encourage rather than block responsible and regulated investment. Why is it, for example, that we import 93% of our salt? Because we have not allowed salt bed developers the license to do that. And of course, we also have the iodized salt problem, which I think we should make optional rather than mandatory. Do you know that large industrial swineries or piggeries suffered rather little from ASF because they invest very heavily on anti-pathogen defenses. Small household piggeries, they can't do that. So we must return private capital to the food sector, which our land policy has been, they have been chased out of the farm sector. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn now to Selva Ramachandra of the UNDP. Selva.
Thank you very much. All protocols are observed. In the interest of time, let me straight away get into the subject matter. First, after the two dynamic speakers, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus some key messages that came up from the latest Human Development Report. This is a Global Human Development Report. The title is Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, Shaping Our Future in a Transforming World. I think it's very timely, and this certainly can contribute to the discussion of the conference and some of the follow-up as well. That's what I'm going to do. And there are some key messages coming up, at least 3 key messages coming up from this particular Human Development Report, which I think it's very important for us to look into it. So next slide, please. Just to give you the context and the 3 messages. Message number 1. First, we now live in a world of worry. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I think that's the state of quo now. We live in a world of worry. There is a survey done among youth in the world, and 92% in Philippines from the survey, the Filipino youth are telling anxiety number 1 for them is climate change. They're frightened of their future. But that means something has to be done. So the Human Development Report clearly says, for the first time in 32 years, the Human Development Index, which measures nations' health, education, and standard of living, has declined for 2 years in a row. And the decline is everywhere, as 90% of countries saw a decline in 1 year or other, including Philippines. Human development has fallen back to its 2016 levels, reversing much of the progress towards SDGs. Certainly, COVID pandemic played a role in this. Next slide, please. Coinciding with this decline in Human Development Index is the emergence of layers of uncertainty that are stacking up and interacting to unsettle life in unprecedented ways. On top of the daily uncertainties that many of us face, we are now navigating through the waters of novel uncertainties. Number 1, the intertwined planetary pressures such as climate change, biodiversity, loss, and other environmental challenges, and their threats that are fundamentally unequal. I don't have to explain this for Philippines. You can see it. Somebody told me Philippines is a supermarket for disaster. You have all kinds of disasters here, right? Number 2, the pursuit of achieving just transition and societal transformation to elevate those planetary pressures. And 3, the widespread intensifying social polarization that delays necessary action for change. You may want to ask why we need to address these uncertainties that cause mental distress and anxieties to almost everyone. Well, uncertainties have many manifestations. Beyond causing frustration and unsettling minds, which then hinder personal growth and development, the uncertainty is often associated with hyperinformation, which fuels mistrust and political divides. Also undermine our ability to collectively act. So if we do not address people's present and future anxieties and the underlying drivers, if we do not build trust and the promise of better future, progress toward future-ready recovery is going to be even harder. I hope the conference will address these issues as it's going to go in the next couple of sessions. So message number 2, uncertainties need not to lead to negative outcomes. Opportunities for transformational change are around, with some of them having been observed to change behaviors and institutions. For climate change uncertainties, for example, recent developments in predicting disasters and modeling impacts have been one of the applications of machine learning, one of the most rapid advances in computing in recent decade. During the pandemic, Behaviors such as wearing masks have become a commonplace even after several countries have lifted the regulation, including in Philippines. I see people are very disciplined. But the policies has to be consistent. So basically, things are changing. Of course, these opportunities do not come with unintended consequences. The revolution of digitalization in health services, such as the increasingly becoming popular telemedicine and education during the pandemic, has somewhat widened the already concerning digital divide in developing countries. One need to look at this issue for Philippines as well. The social media, which lifted the voices of marginalized groups, have also become tools for those who want to misinform and do more harm than good. We see this in daily life as well. In general, the direction to which recent developments and societal transformation and response to the uncertainties will go largely depend on us and how we have much to learn, both from good and the bad. Next slide. The third message. Policies that focus on 3 I's will enable people to thrive in the face of uncertainty. What is the 3 I's? Investment in resilience, insurance against the interacting layers of uncertainty, innovation to expand societal chances to thrive in uncertainties. Investment in resilience is key. I think it's absolutely key for Philippines. The type of investment for future-ready economy need to enhance capabilities required to successfully navigate an uncertain future. These investments range from renewable energy to preparedness for pandemics, to extreme natural hazards. Of course, investment in health and education is absolutely key. And I would like to stress investment in girls' education is absolutely a must. Insurance against the interacting layers of uncertainty is very important. Insurance guarantees protection or compensation against shocks emanating from interacting layers of uncertainties. Insurance includes social protection and state contingent debt instruments, as well as provisions of social services such as health and education. Lastly, innovation to expand societies. While it's good to prioritize investment in research and science to push the frontiers of knowledge and mobile technological change, but it's also important to innovate responsibly and addressing justice and sustainability. Innovation should also focus on many forms of technological, economic, cultural, to respond to unknown challenges that humanity will face. Of course, some of the issues we can take it up further during the discussion. In the interest of time, let me stop and let me emphasize that the time to act is now and the cost of inaction is huge. I think that's a message not for Philippines, for all the developing countries. The time is to act. We can debate on many things, but clear policy actions is needed. Thank you very much.
Salva, thank you very much. As you may notice, we're running a bit late. They've given us until about 10:45, so that's about, I think, 15 minutes more. I do have a lot of questions, if you let me, but I'd like to turn it to the audience. If you have questions, please jump in right now, and I'll just fill in later on if there's more time. I see a hand over here. I see a gentleman in the back who asked a question a while ago, so I'll go here first, maybe to table number 3.
I'd just like to make this thing interesting and challenge Dr. Fabelia's statements. Your first statement.
I think I know you, but in case some
Alex
people don't know, of course.
PES President 2005. Dr. Pavelia was my Econ 101 professor before he went to Yale. That dates me. Okay. Dr. Raul, you have 2 parts in your statement. One is that the first part is like reading the book of Lamentations. What should have been, what should be, what would have been. Okay. My comment on that is that this is something I would have posed to Dr. Rodrik, is that the usual growth path is agriculture, manufacturing to create the middle class, and services. But we had no choice because when China became the factory to the world, and Korea and Vietnam eventually, and with the WTO in 2005 and NAFTA, even our own puny assembly plant from Ford went to Vietnam. So that's really a hollowing out of our manufacturing capabilities. That said, I'm more hopeful about the second part of your statement. On the way here, I was listening to Farid Zacarias quoting General Omar Bradley. Sabi niya, ordinary soldiers talk about strategy, with all due respect to Arneda Yusek. But very good soldiers talk about logistics, meaning the nuts and bolts of what will it take for us to move forward. And you have listed a good number of them. And it's really all about our infrastructure. And even in the workshop with the Freedom for Economic Index, where we rated very low on rule of law, property rights, and enforcement of rights. That is, I think that's part of the things that we are addressing at the FEF. So you don't have to respond to my point number one because you are entitled to your rueful lamentations. But specifically, how do we get those part to happen? Thank you.
Dr. Fabella.
Thank you, Alex. We go a long way, Alex. And many of our ideas actually are congruent. Many of the steps that I mentioned in the pro-tradable ecology is shared by FEF. And in fact, some of our advocacies are there. Yes. But what I wanted was to put these advocacies under one roof. It's what I call a pro-tradable ecology. I think that for the longest time, we have been our policy has been anti-tradables and pro-non-tradables. And that is precisely what Dani Rodrik, the old Dani Rodrik, not the new one, the old Dani Rodrik, in his very studied moments in 2008 paper proclaimed that the playing field could be leveled by the use of the exchange rate. Or you change all the prices, okay? If you don't want the exchange to use the exchange rate, change all the prices, reduce the wages, etc. This is what Paul Krugman said when he was here in the 1990s. The reason why you use the exchange rate is that you don't want to reduce wages, because that will be a social volcano. Okay, so what I wanted was to put all these ideas together under one roof and provide a doctrine associated with it, perhaps another thought collective associated with it. You notice I've called the Impossible Trinity a thought collective, because that is what it is. A thought collective essentially is people talking to people who they agree with. And if you disagree with them, they will shout at you. Anyway, Alex, we can have lunch. You have been inviting for an outing, so we can have lunch together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Fabella. Maybe I'd ask Yusek and Dr. Yusek first and Dr. Fabella to comment on this. The new Dani Rodrik, or actually the only Dani, Dr. Fabella, you know, he talks about we should create jobs for the workers we have, not jobs for the workers we wish we have. You're talking about the Rodrik you wish you had, not the Rodrik that you do have, that you wish you had. Yusek and Dr. Fabella, I think, unless I'm mistaken, Rodrik was saying that's maybe a little less valid now because a lot of the jobs are in fact in the non-tradables or the services sector, and he doesn't know, or it's not clear that there are all those manufacturing jobs that people can flow into. So I'd like to ask you, Sec, you started off by talking about high quality jobs, and then a short reaction from Dr. Fabella. Are we resigned to the fact that despite the theory that it should go from agri, manufacturing, and services, that maybe the manufacturing part is not there to be had, or to a much less extent than we wish, and we really just should ramp up for services? Undersecretary.
No, we're not conceding that we need to boost up our manufacturing. In fact, one of the takeaway points I got from the speech earlier by Professor Rodrik is that just choose those parts of the manufacturing sector that is, that can accommodate, absorb the labor resources that you have now. As we'd like to have highly skilled workforce, but we can have that now yet. Yeah. So even as we try to improve our human capital through education and all that, that will be in the medium term, short term. But the point now is what can we do at the moment with those less skilled Filipinos, as you've probably seen the labor force survey report yesterday. There's still a lot of Filipinos who are gainfully employed, but still, wanting extra hours of work. That is indicative of, the low quality jobs that they have. But the good thing about that report, the labor force survey report yesterday, is that they're back in the labor force. They're working. So I think that's a positive sign nonetheless. Of course, we're not ignoring that underemployment still, has risen. In fact, that's the next, task that we'd like to address.
Dr. Fabella, can we move to a higher income status if we have a huge challenge in gaining manufacturing jobs, not just because of our abilities, but maybe those jobs are not growing the way they used to?
No, my evidence will still revolve around Vietnam. Take a bet. Vietnam is going to be an OECD country in the next 10, 20 years. And it will be the first OECD country, Asian country, after those that are already in, because there are countries that are already in. And it is following exactly the Rodrik, the old the old Rodrik formula. In 2020, the US State Department threatened to label Vietnam as a currency manipulator. You know what the currency manipulator is? They rack up trade surpluses against the US, but they don't allow the exchange rate to move. In 2020, all the currencies, it's very different from now, all the currencies in East Asia appreciated 10%, except Vietnam. Why? Because it is a promise. Come here, come to us, make us a platform, export platform. We will protect your back. And that means we're not going to hurt you by letting our currency appreciate. Export platform. If it's an export platform, you don't want to lose money through a appreciating exchange rate. So everyone lost in 2020 except Vietnam.
Thanks, Dr. Fabella. Before I turn back to the audience, Selva, your discussion was on a very different plane. It was not directly about jobs, but more about the situation that we find ourselves in, a lot of anxiety. You talk about that. And your prescription is 3 I's. Invest in resilience, insurance, and then innovation. I found the innovation part interesting because I don't think you were focused too much on the usual STEM type innovation, but innovation in justice and sustainability, in the concentration on addressing the concentrations of power, and even addressing misinformation. These are all great ideas and thoughts. How do they address the current problem of jobs?
I think for me, the issue is a perspective that we need to have. You can create jobs and you also can lose jobs. One typhoon can wipe out livelihood of many, many communities. So I think for me, we need to look at things in perspective, and it's real. We are living in present, and it's evident that we face the problem at the moment. So I think whatever we do, we have to look at the resilience dimensions quite carefully. The investment on the resilience side is very, very important. I read from the DOF statement. Last decade, the country loss and damages is equivalent to 10 billion. You are only 0.03% of greenhouse gas emitters, but you are on the front end of the impact. So I think the perspective is important. But coming back to some of the things, what from the UN we feel it's important. I think this is also in line what you will be hearing from COP27 for developing countries. Some issues are key. Resilience is key. Therefore, the insurance also need to be linked into resilience. I see, for an example, may not be the best example, but in Mexico, the government has bought insurance against coral reef because the livelihood of people is coral reef. Coral reef protects the entire environment. And when they bought the insurance, and when certain disaster hit at certain level, they managed to get the insurance and immediately they kickstarted the livelihood of people, right? When it comes to the pandemic as thought, you can't move forward. Digitalization is greatest innovation. I think even in Philippines, the digitalization helped a lot of people during the pandemic. So the whole world will move into that direction. But how do we handle digitalization? We have to digitalize. We have to do digitalization, minusing digital divide. Can we have that kind of policies? Because that sector itself is creating a lot of jobs. Now you look at the millennials; they work from home. And you look at international labor standards and trade unions, they don't represent them anymore. It's a very different world. So the decent job, we need to look into the issue of decent job from the new generation, a new perspective. And let's also hear the voices of.
Thanks very much. Questions from the audience? I see table 9. Sorry, I saw table 18 earlier, and then we'll go to table 9. There's a lady in table 18. If I could ask you to introduce yourself, maybe keep it brief.
My name is Calla Weimer. I am here to market a textbook, and I have a table out in front. I used to be on the faculty of the UP School of Economics some years ago, and while I was there, we held a meeting hosting representatives from the U.S. Embassy. I'm an American, which a number of faculty attended, and maybe Dakoy, you were there, I don't recall. The commercial attaché was there and economics representatives from the U.S. Embassy to talk about the business environment for foreign investment. The big complaint that they had was corruption in the Philippines. And if you look at the rankings for corruption, the Philippines is way below Vietnam, it's below Indonesia, it's below Thailand, it's below Malaysia. The Philippines performs very poorly in that sense. Nobody complained about the exchange rate, the peso being overvalued. It was really corruption that they said was a deterrent to American firms coming to do business here. I'm going to add to this that I've recently been inducted to an organization in the US called the National Business Economic Issues Council. This is a group of corporate economists from the top companies in the United States and some companies from other countries as well. And my role would be to brief them on business conditions in Asia. The leadership of this organization would like to hold a meeting here a couple of years from now, and Arsenio Balasacan has told me that NETA would be happy to host it. But the Philippines actually is not much on the radar of most of the corporations that are members of this group. Vietnam is much more on their radar. It's not because of the exchange rate, as far as my engagement with these people would suggest. I think corruption remains a huge issue for American businesses. And I'd like to know, what can I tell these people to give them a sense that things are going to get better here? I'd like to hear something positive that I could take back.
I'm going to give that to the undersecretary.
Should we page the secretary, please?
I think he's enjoying the Senate hearing more than this.
Oh boy. Okay, what can I say? We're trying to simplify a lot of the business processes, especially dealing with the government. One of the you must have heard one of the 8-point economic agenda of the president is that right sizing the bureaucracy. The idea is that to reduce the steps and processes, which are often the openings for corruption, graft practices, and all that. So we're moving in that direction. Of course, leveling the playing field, competition law, competition policies, and regulations. These are still very much part in the agenda. And in the PDP, the Philippine Development Plan, we're detailing a lot of steps, strategies, even legislative measures that will feed into that, leveling the competition, leveling the playing field, simplifying the regulation, regulatory policies and processes and things like that. Perhaps your friends from the business sector in America will be glad to know that we just passed the revised IRR for the BOT law. The idea being, to increase the bankability of PPP projects in the Philippines, simplify the processes of getting approval for PPP projects. PSA, the Public Service Act, is also one of the initiatives that were started in the previous administration that we are continuing on under the current administration. That will also open opportunities for businesses to come in. And another one is we're now finalizing the guidelines for joint ventures between private sector enterprises and private sector corporations. So we have all of those, the PSA, the JV guidelines, the BOT, IRR. We're well on track to completing those within the year. I think that should help send a positive signal, not only to your corporate friends, but to all foreign businesses and even our domestic entrepreneurs, that the government is serious about, partnering up this time with the business sector.
Allow me to add to that my own organization, for example, has talked to about a dozen of the heads of the different government agencies, including, we started with Secretary Balisacan, but all the others. And I don't know when you were here last, Madam, but if it was in the last 6 years compared to now, the big difference is that the previous government is anti-business and this one is pro-business. There is some grumbling right now that the immediate plans are not very clear. They are working on the medium-term plans, but at least the reception or the perspective is very pro-business. So there's that to look forward to, and that we're confident of. I think there was a question from table 9. Yes.
Hi, my name is Chetan Ghate. I'm a professor at the Indian Statistical Institute in Delhi, and I'm also the director of the Institute of Economic Growth in Delhi. I thought maybe one way to bridge the 3 very interesting presentations was that the first 2 speakers, Mr. Capuno and Professor Fabella, were talking about sectoral frictions and sectoral approaches to growth and efficiency. And the last speaker is speaking about resiliency. Resiliency, of course, is expensive. And what economies will increasingly have to straddle is a resiliency efficiency trade-off. Now, if economic prosperity is not going to be driven by, it will be driven by efficiency, but if resiliency is important, more funds will have to be allocated to to resiliency. So just wondering if the panelists have a view on that vis-a-vis the Philippines economy, on what the relative strengths of these two priorities could take. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Fabella. This will be our last question and answer, unfortunately. Go ahead.
This will address both resilience and fear of corruption. Kala, it's not only foreign investors that fear corruption. I was interviewing the owner of a very modern industrial piggery in the islands in the Visayas. I asked him whether he was affected by AFS. He said not as much. And the reason is that we are big enough. We have a huge plot of land. We have a buffer zone. You cannot enter the buffer zone. So, and the people who are working inside do not even interact with the janitorial services outside. This is resilience, but you have to spend a lot of money for this. Then I asked him, I'm going to have to talk somewhere, and I'm going to cite you. He said, no names. Not even the island where we operate. Kala. She was afraid of the BIR. He was afraid of the BIR. He was afraid that the government, knowing him, will begin to try to eat up on his resources. He was afraid of being known, afraid of the government. So first, if you want resilience, you may want to think about large industrial wineries. They spend a lot of money on anti-pathogen investments and defenses against a pathogen infection. That is resilience. But you cannot do that if private capital is kept out of the farm sector. So yes, corruption is terrible, but I think I agree with the government's current direction. If the government begins and already started to retreat from many activities which the market can do, for example, PPP, that's very good. The reason it's very good is because there is less government dirty fingers into PPP. Yes, it is bottom line oriented, but that is disciplined bottom line oriented. It's not private pocket oriented when the government does it. So I'm in total agreement with Mr. Singson here and his company, who is doing a lot of PPP. So yes, we are very far behind, and I think that our reputation is bad, and therefore we have to chip away at that bad reputation.
Thanks very much, Dr. Fabella. Maybe as a final note, I'll turn to Dr. Ramachandran. Dr. Fabella talked about resilience, and one of your eyes is investment in resilience. Could you talk a bit more about that, especially in light of all of these eyes of yours, investment, innovation, what is the other eye? I forget. All costs a lot of money. How does a poorer country do that?
I think this is an important question from all developing countries. I think that's what they're asking in COP27 now. That's a discussion that's going on. But coming back, my own view is something we have to do it through our own local resources. Something you have to get it from loss and damages. I hope we will have some financing for loss and damages, increased funding for adaptation. These are these are discussions going on. But some things have to come from local resources. I see statistics in the country. I understand there's a local disaster fund to respond to disasters. Only 60% of the fund is being used. Why? Why the funds are not used? Because that could be used for resilience, for disaster response. So these are some of the things we have to see at the local level, right? Moving forward for resilience, the whole world is now suffering from a very high energy cost, and that has an impact for all over. Can we slowly move into renewable energy transition? But energy transition has to be just overnight. You can't change it, right? So these are some of the things we need to look into it, and investment has to go. And I hope the multilateral banks will play a very important role in this dimension, because you guys and poor countries do not have the resources. Right?
Thank you very much. A final word, Yusek, a brief final word.
Yeah, regarding resilience, there is an increasing emphasis under the new administration on climate resilient infrastructure. We lose a lot of roads, bridges, irrigation facilities due to the frequent typhoons and natural disasters that we get every year in the country. And children are missing a lot of school days because their school buildings are damaged, and it takes a long time for them to get repaired. I think it was brought up during one of the, I'm not privy to the cabinet meetings, but this is one of the chismes that the secretary shared with us.
That's the most interesting part. Go.
Yeah. Well, the vice president, who's the secretary of the Department of Education, happened to mention, why don't we build climate resilient school buildings? We know it's going to cost, but in the long run, it's going to save us too. Right? So there's that, simple realization on us. I mean, personally myself, that things that might be expensive now will pay for themselves in the long run. So climate resilient infrastructure is one of the emphasis that we're putting in the development plan.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our very excellent panel this morning.